The CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
Listen, it's getting closer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet? Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retrocomputing news and information featuring the Tandy Color Computer. All right, welcome back. This is John Linville.
And Neil Blanchard.
And we are the CoCo Crew, and this is episode 7. This episode's coming a little bit closer to the last one than usual. With the holidays coming up, we have some travel plans that are slightly interfering with our normal recording schedule, so we're just going to move things up and take care of this now so that we all can enjoy the holidays. We're going to make up for it later in the show. We are going to have a roundtable discussion. It's the first time we've actually had guests on the show, so that should be fun and exciting. Don't you think, Neil?
Definitely. We wanted to have a show for you, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for the record, the news and announcements is being recorded separately, so you don't have to imagine Boise making faces at us or anything like that, because he is unaware of what we are saying right now. So watch your mouth, Nick. Let's see. It is now about mid-December. CoCo Fest, our big event, is coming up in a little more than 4 months. Neil, you got any CoCo Fest projects underway?
I do. I'm actually working on a photo booth. If I can source the right digitizer in time, I'm trying to get this project underway.
Awesome. Well, that sounds pretty cool.
I can't believe it's 4 months already to CoCo Fest.
Yeah, I know. It's crawling up on us. I've got a couple of software things going on. Well, none of them are really specific for CoCo Fest right now. I do have one hardware-related project that I think we'll probably mention before. Maybe I'll just hint at it now, but maybe you and I will work on getting something together hardware-wise too. So everyone get excited and be sure to come and visit the CoCo Crew booth at CoCo Fest. Should be a very exciting time.
We're going to have our own booth this year.
Yeah, I think so. We may even have our own CoCo Fest road trip. Neil and I have been batting around the idea of buddying up and sharing a ride, which is a little bit funny because we don't actually live anywhere close to each other. But what we're talking about, that may be the way. We've talked about trying to extend the trip somehow, spend a little more time hanging out with our CoCo buddies, and this may be a way that at least Neil and I can hang out a little bit more, having a road trip. And
maybe check out the barcade along the way?
Yeah, we'll probably hit the barcade around Columbus, Ohio, or we'll see what other plans come along. It should be fun one way or another. Not set on that yet, but it sounds like that plan is firming up for us. So that should be pretty cool. Okay, anything else? Let's see. How about eBay stuff? You doing anything on eBay lately?
I am still selling on eBay. I put my last extra CoCo 3 up.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's not as pretty as the other one. It's definitely not going to win a beauty pageant, but it is fully loaded.
Awesome. Fully loaded is always good, right? Yeah, it's. I haven't done much on eBay recently, or at least I did buy an Xbox game and a PlayStation game, but those are more related to my son. My son has taken an interest in some retro video game stuff, which is kind of funny because his retro sort of starts at my too new line.
I was just going to say that when I hear Xbox and PlayStation, I'm thinking brand new.
Yeah, well, we picked up an Xbox at a local thrift shop in a really good condition, and we don't have any games, so I picked up Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Haven't had a chance to play that yet, but it looks kind of cool.
And didn't you acquire a GameCube?
We got a GameCube at the same time. Yes, it was a happy day at the thrift shop for us a couple of weeks back.
If you want to get real technical, the GameCube actually is kind of retro, especially if you get the Game Boy player for it, because then you can play games from the 80s.
Yeah, that's true. The players, a problem, though, is like you can find the players, but you can't find the discs. You need a startup disc to make that work. Anyway, I did have one CoCo acquisition. I got a collection of disc games that includes Seamus, which is really what I was looking for. Also, the Larry Bird one-on-one, Biosphere, and Color Computer Artist. I think I already had certainly those two. I may have already had the one-on-one, but I didn't have Seamus. So I may have a few extra games if anybody's looking for the other games mentioned.
Was that auction from Canada by any chance?
Let's see. I'd have to look at it.
I think I remember seeing that.
No, Vincennes, Indiana. Let's see. Who is it we know in Indiana?
Well, we know somebody.
Somebody who does another podcast. What is that other podcast? I don't know. Well, I don't know. We're just joshing you, Randy. I don't think that was Randy either, though. But yeah, no, I haven't. Not a lot of eBay action for me this month. But, there's still time. There is one thing I'm kind of eyeing. Some people don't realize that there are a number of specific part numbers for CoCo 2s. And there were 3 or 4 base numbers, and then there were A's and B's of those. There's one in particular that I'm looking for on behalf of a friend who's looking for a very specific number that I'm not going to disclose because I don't want to make them any more rare. I see one right now that's not the number he's looking for. But what it is the same. It's the same motherboard with the non-extended basic. I don't know if he's interested in it or not. I'm kind of interested in it if he's not. I don't know. It's I don't know if I'll end up with that one or not. I'm not going to go any more detail because I don't need any competition.
There certainly was a ton of different models on the CoCo too.
Yeah, there were a lot.
I can't keep track of them.
Well, there were Korean models and U.S. models, and there were, like you say, base numbers and A's and B's, and you had the some of them, like the 3134s were the non-extended basic, and the 3136s were the extended color basic. But otherwise, at each one is similar to the other, except for the basics included. I don't know. You kind of needed a decoder key to keep up with them all, but. There is a web page. Let's see, Techno something.
I use that website for disc controllers as well. He's got a good write-up on the different disc controllers.
Yes, there's a Techno's CoCo 2 model summary. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes. So there's a lot of good information out there. Yeah, so that's probably a good introduction.
Christmas tree, my Christmas tree, lit up like a star. When I see my Christmas tree, can loved ones before. Christmas tree, I'm certain, wherever.
Ray, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. And a Happy New Year.
All right, time for some announcements. As you know, we are the CoCo Crew Podcast. We are available on Twitter as @CoCo Crew Podcast. We also have a Facebook page. Just look for the CoCo Crew Podcast. We are available on iTunes and through Stitcher for streaming. And if Google Play ever activates their podcast facilities, we should be listed there as well. I was looking on iTunes recently. I noticed that somebody did write a little review for us. Seemed positive, 4 stars, and we'd rather have 5, but 4 is not bad. If you are so inclined, please do visit iTunes, visit our podcast site on iTunes, and write us a review that helps other people find the podcast. We are now a member of the Throwback Network. If you're not familiar with the Throwback Network, it is a collection or list of other retro-themed podcasts, many of which are technology-themed, but some others are more nostalgia-based. Anyway, there's a link in the show notes to the throwbacknetwork.net. I suggest you check it out. We are also now listed on the Game by Game podcast information hub. This is a list of podcasts specifically for technology podcasts for really for gaming platforms, but it also lists some computer-based podcasts as well. I'm not sure that we're totally a gaming podcast, but we do have a game segment, so I guess that makes sense. There's a lot of good podcasts listed there. I think the site is maintained by Shinto, who I think he's got his own podcast now on the Atari Jaguar, and he's been a contributor to a number of other gaming podcasts. He is a entertaining personality. I suggest that if you're looking for another podcast, that you go and check out either Shinto's own podcast or at least the list of Game by Game podcasts. There's a lot of good stuff on there. Audio for the CoCo Crew podcast is hosted at Cyber Ears. If you're looking for a provider to take care of your podcast hosting needs, then I suggest that you check out Cyber Ears, provide a quality service. If you want to reach the CoCo Crew podcast by email, we have a number of addresses available. You can reach us at show@cococrew.org, podcast@cococrew.org, or feedback@cococrew.org. And if you wanted to reach Neil or I directly, you can reach me as john@cococrew.org. And of course, you can reach Neil as neil@cococrew.org. Those are all our standard announcements. This time, I wanted to include a few announcements of events as you're planning your spring travel. Coming up this spring, particularly in the month of April, there are a number of retro computing events that you may want to be aware of. First up is the Vintage Computer Festival Southeast in 2016. This is being held on the weekend of April 2nd and 3rd, and it is held in Roswell, Georgia. This is an event put on by the Atlanta Historical Computing Society. It's a good event. Previously, it's had numbers, so VCF Southeast 2.0, 3.0, that sort of stuff. I'm not sure if they are changing that or if that just is not in the announcement I'm looking at. Anyway, it's a pretty good event. They've been holding it at a former CompUSA location, so there's a lot of space available for exhibiting. I assume they're still hosting it in the same location. They are also associated with what appears to be calling itself the Computer Museum of America. I thought it had a different name in the past and with more of a focus on Apple. Perhaps they're expanding. Anyway, if you were in the Southeast, particularly southeast part of the United States, particularly in or around the Atlanta region, I definitely think you should avail yourself of the opportunity to visit VCF Southeast in April. Following week, there is an event. This is across the pond in the UK. This is called the Walsall Games Mart. I don't know a lot about this event. I think it's still trying to bootstrap itself a bit. Let's see. Here's the announcement. Coming into Walsall in 2016 from the makers of Walsall Comic Con, which will also return later in the year. Walsall Gaming Mart will bring a slice of retro gaming to the West Midlands. It's not just video games. We'll have CCGs. I'm not sure what that is. Wargaming and lots of traders selling related products from your favorite franchises. Anyway, it's a gaming event with a focus on video games. This is being held in the UK, in the Midlands area. I looked it up. I think they're a bit north of Birmingham, if you're familiar with UK geography. Just thought it'd be inclusive, and if your travels include going across to the UK, or perhaps if you're in the UK, you may want to check it out.
Probably some Dragon users nearby.
I would hope they are. In fact, part of the UK, I think, is awfully close to Wales, which is, of course, the home of the Dragon. There ought to be a lot of Dragon users in and around, so hopefully the Walsall GameSmart will accommodate those guys. I would love to. I like visiting the UK. I'd love to make it over there, but there's already enough stuff happening in April that I'm not sure I'll be able to make this one. But I hope a lot of you do have a chance to go, and I hope you enjoy it and make the best of it and turn it into an all-Dragon event. That would be awesome. The following weekend, there will be VCF East 11. This is a Vintage Computing Festival. East is held in Wall, New Jersey. The InfoAge Science Center, which is an interesting site with a lot of Marconi radio history and also some United States military site. But it's been turned over to some local I think they know they're nerds, but some local nerds and geeks and people like us that maintain a technology museum there. And they put on a retro computing event every year. They did miss a year after the hurricane that hit up in the Northeast a couple of years back. But other than that, they put on this event. It's a pretty good event. Lots of microcomputers. There's also a fair amount of big iron at their events. I'm not sure what the concentration is up there that enables them to have all that big iron mainframe and large mini computers and a lot of old stuff. If you're interested in that sort of thing, this is the event that you should definitely check out. It's a good bunch of guys. I've been to the event twice. Organizer Evan Koblentz, very nice guy, very, very friendly and helpful to me as an exhibitor. Anyway, it's a good event if you are in the northeast part of the United States. If you're in and around New York and New Jersey, this is the Jersey Shore area that we've learned so much about thanks to our friends at MTV. But it's a pretty good event. It's 3 days, April 15th, 16th, and 17th. What they do is on that first day, which is Friday, they actually have it broken out into like a little seminar and classes or whatever. I'm not sure exactly what they're offering this year, but they go in depth on stuff. I know I had the events I've been to. They did some stuff on maintenance of machines, learning about disk drive maintenance and repairing CRTs, and a lot of cool stuff. They get a pretty good draw of some more famous people. Not a lot of Tandy folks, but they did get like Bill Hurd, who was the designer of the Commodore 128. He seems to be involved with the event. And they drew, I met Dave Haney there, who was one of the big Amiga guys. It's a cool event if you're looking for retro computing stuff and you're in and around New York, New Jersey. You definitely should think about checking it out.
I'm thinking of checking it out myself. I've always had a thing for those big mainframes.
Yeah, definitely. It's probably not too far for you, I guess, right?
No, it's not. I should make the drive one year.
Yeah. But, of course, the next weekend, April 23rd to 24th, along with being the dates for our local Maker Fair here in Burlington, North Carolina, which is not what I'm covering here, but April 23rd and 24th, 2016, of course, is the 25th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest. This is the big event for CoCo users around the world, or at least in the United States. Seriously, if you are a CoCo person, if you are at all serious about this hobby, which maybe is a silly thing to be serious about, but some of us are, you should make your way to Lombard, Illinois for the Chicago area, I guess, CoCo Fest. There's a link in the show notes if we haven't talked about it enough already. This is a big event. This is where the CoCo people show up to show their projects, show their new products, talk about the CoCo, enjoy each other's company and camaraderie. It's a great event. Can't say enough good about it.
It really is. And even if you're a Dragon user, still show up.
I would love to have as many Dragon users. I would definitely happy to consider Dragon users as honorary CoCo users and have them show up. If I could help you organize a charter flight or whatever, let me know. But no, seriously, this is a big event. We would love to see as many people there. Again, I'm hoping we blow the doors off of the event and get a lot of people coming in that are podcast listeners. I'm going to tell a little something. Neil and I joined the planning call for CoCo Fest a couple of nights ago with the Glenside Computer Club folks who are planning the event. Our podcast is getting at least 300, maybe closer to 400 regular listeners, is based on the downloads at least. And so I would have thought that all the normal identifiable CoCo folks would be in that group, but it was painfully obvious to Neil and I that the guys at that planning call, many of them didn't seem to be regular listeners. Even some of them didn't even seem to be totally aware of the podcast. So we must have someone somewhere else making up our listener numbers. It would be pretty funny to see those people show up and sell out the floor, call in the fire marshal. If you are on the fence at all, if I could persuade you with a personal discussion, please reach out to me. I'll be happy to talk to you.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this or not, but you're reading through all these events for April, but you see the order? They saved the best for last.
Yeah, they definitely saved the best for last. Oh, pretty funny. Okay, so that probably covers our event announcements, and we are going to move on to some news.
It's a Radio Shack Merry Christmas.
This year, I needed to give a real family pleaser.
Honey, please help me with this budget.
How about a new game, Dad? Please.
And I found it. Radio Shack's Color Computer 2. On sale for just $99.95. It entertains, educates, manages, it's expandable, and affordable. Now that really pleases me.
The Color Computer 2. Sale priced for Christmas. Only at Radio Shack.
All right, and now it's time for a little CoCo news. As we alluded to, we're recording only a couple of weeks after our last episode, and so not a lot of time has passed by. So not a lot of time implies not a lot of news. So we're going to make the best of it, but our news segment is going to be a bit shorter than usual. All right, first up, we have an announcement from Jim Gary. We mentioned Jim quite a bit over the various episodes, as this is the fellow who writes a lot of games in BASIC, mostly for the MC10, and then later he translates them to run on the CoCo. Although sometimes I think he goes starts on the CoCo and takes it back to the MC10. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, so Jim has posted that he found a video from 1987 that showed somebody writing a game on the Atari, the 8-bit Atari, which basically was a Pac-Man game written in BASIC with a text-based approximation of a Pac-Man maze. And it was written in 5 lines of BASIC. And somewhere in that video, the person says something about, only on the Atari could you write such a game like this in 5 lines of code or something like that. And Jim, I guess, took umbrage at that, and so he has gone and implemented substantially the same game in. I guess this is on the MC10. It's color basic one way or the other. It looks pretty similar to me. So to Jim posted the CoCo lists that he had met the challenge, and he's posted a YouTube video about it. I think that is awesome. Jim, you're an awesome guy. What do you think about that, Neil?
He definitely is. Anybody coding for CoCo.
All right. Speaking of CoCo coders from the past, this particular individual is certainly some people's favorite coder. I was reading I get a subscription to a magazine called Nuts and Bolts, which is an electronics hobbyist magazine, which covers not only electronics, simple circuits and stuff. Nowadays, that crosses over into digital electronics, and of course, a lot of digital electronics are basically computers, and so it involves programming and a lot of other stuff like that. But a lot of the articles involve Raspberry Pi and Arduino and other kind of systems that are designed for practical or physical computing, so which includes animatronics, robotics, control of items, that sort of thing. Anyway, so as you might imagine, I guess it's probably the September issues. The issue before Halloween every year is sort of full of Halloween how-tos and topics on how to make scary displays for your neighborhood trick-or-treaters and that sort of thing. So I was reading an article in this along these lines, and the title kind of caught my eye. Single chip audio spectrum analyzer makes singing easier. Right, so audio spectrum analyzer, that of course is the name of a cartridge for the CoCo, and that cartridge, the software on that cartridge was written by Steve Bjork, who is also famous for a number of CoCo games, including Megabug and Clowns and Balloons, Pitfall 2, and of course Zaxxon. For whatever reason, the byline on this particular article was on the second page, and as I flipped to the second page, it says, by Steve Bjork. So imagine that. So I get to looking a little bit closer. It all seemed to match up, and I'm relatively certain that this is our Steve Bjork, the very same fellow, and he's written this article in Nuts and Bolts on Halloween displays. If you're interested in that sort of thing, or if you're just interested in what Mr. Bjork is up to these days, you may want to check it out in the Nuts and Bolts magazine. I'll put a link in the show notes that'll take you to that article in that issue.
When you sent me that article, that's the first thing that went through my mind is the title. That sounds very familiar. And then seeing his name, I figured right away.
Yeah, so basically in that article, he uses there's a chip that's available that does basically the job that's being done in software with that cartridge. 30 years later, we've got a little chip that's doing it, and he uses it. It's really a chip designed to drive equalizer displays. So you get different bars that show, what range of frequencies of the tones are being played, that sort of thing. So he plays a musical track into that and gets those signals back out, and then uses those signals to then drive the moving mouths on skeleton heads, skulls. And so you get singing skulls. It's a pretty cool little project. But anyway, it's just kind of funny that Mr. Bjork makes the appearance into the electronics hobby world there, or at least where we're seeing it, and it's associated with the audio spectrum analysis. It's just kind of funny for me as a CoCo user. Okay, so along those same lines, also in a more recent issue of Nuts and Bolts, there is an article about something called Color Basic, which of course also kind of drew my attention. In this case, Color Basic refers to, well, it is a form of BASIC, but it's running on a platform using a processor known as Propeller. And Propeller is a modern microcontroller platform which has some interesting architectural aspects. Basically, it has 8 hardware threads running at the same time. It's sort of like the way hyperthreading is done in modern Intel CPUs or whatever. Not exactly the same, but similar in some ways. Anyway, so they're using a Propeller-based board, and they've loaded up a program they're called Color Basic that implements a 80s style basic programming environment. And then he's advocating the use of this platform and this BASIC for introducing computers to young people or whatever, which seems like the kind of topic that would be near and dear to the hearts of all us old 80s computer users with a touch of nostalgia that brings us all together. It is not, of course, a 6809 project at all, and it's not even exactly Color Basic as we CoCo users know it. But it is a project that's out there. It's kind of neat. It's somewhat similar to another project that is out in the world called Maximite, which is also similarly a modern microcontroller platform running a 80s style basic programming environment to do similar things. These are both sort of physical computing platforms, so they for running motors, turning lights on and off, that sort of stuff. And of course, they can be used for driving graphics displays and playing computer games and stuff. And the Maximite, of course, is a target for some development from Nick Morentis out of the CoCo community. He has a version of Donut Dilemma that runs on the Maximite. That is a lot of fun to play. I wonder if we could persuade Nick to port Donut Dilemma over to this Propeller-based Color Basic. But then even if we could, would we want him to, or would we want him to finish working on Popstar Pilot? I suspect I know the answer. If you are looking for a retro-ish computing platform with a modern twist, you may want to check out this Color Basic platform covered in nuts and bolts. Link in the show notes. In my travels around the web, I happened onto a Dragon forum recently and stumbled across a design for something that's not actually a new design, but it's new to me, and it's called the Dragon Lab Cartridge PCB. This is from Roland Schweiger, or also known as Rollo. We've mentioned some of his projects before, particularly a multi EEPROM pack. Basically, Rollo had produced essentially a prototyping board with some pads for mounting chips and electrical components and that sort of thing, and then with a card edge that you can plug into the cartridge port on a CoCo or Dragon. Anyway, thought it was cool. Thought I'd mention it. This is a kind of a cool project that I think some people would be interested in. I know Rollo was down on a limited supply. I talked to him a little bit about this. I think maybe if we all beat a path to his door, he'll produce some more boards. Anyway, if nothing else, it's an idea for people who want to produce their own boards. Maybe they want to do something similar to Rollo's board, or maybe they want to do something completely different. What do you think, Neil? Could you use a prototyping board?
I have to learn hardware a little more, but...
So it's a good point. Not everybody does those kind of experiments or whatever. If you do want to experiment with a cartridge port, it's nice to already have a board that can plug into it. Otherwise, you have to kind of scratch and scramble a bit to find something to make the electrical connections. The next item is also a Dragon item. This is from Rob, and I don't know Rob's last name. This is ROBCFG is his handle, or Rob Config, over on the worldofdragon.org. Rob has announced what he is calling a DGN block, or I assume that's Dragon block. And basically, this is a piece of code that actually targets Windows, Mac, and Linux platforms. And what it does is it allows you to take the CAS file from an emulator representing a cassette tape, and you can take two CAS files and bring them up and swap blocks between them. The idea is if you have a couple of copies of a program on a physical cassette tape that may have degraded over time, if you can get, quite often those cassette tapes had the program recorded multiple times on the same cassette. And so if you have that and you're not quite sure which one is correct, or maybe you're not able to load any of them, if you can spin them off, get separate CAS files for each, and then you can bring them up and look at the actual data blocks in this utility, this Dragon block utility. And it's supposed to make it easy to say, well, yeah, I'll take this block and I'll not take that block, and this block I'm going to take, but I'm going to edit it, that sort of stuff. It's some assembly required, shall we say. You need to know what you're doing to make a good use of this, but if you do know what you're doing, this might make your life a little bit easier than having to do it all by hand.
I think that's awesome for archiving as well. Call it, I guess you can call it digital splicing.
That's exactly what it is. It's like if you could do that splice, and like I say, you have 3 copies of a program, and they all have byte different here or there. You might not know which is which, but if you look and if you see that the byte differences are all in different blocks, and in each block, the one that's different, there's 2 other copies that are the same as each other. Maybe you've decided that those are the right one, and so you take that block from the one and do it again on the next block, that sort of thing. Anyway, if you want to learn more, there's a link in the show notes pointing out to the discussion on World of Dragon. All right, so not too long ago, Neil, actually, you posted a picture from Retro Gamer magazine, and you noticed a CoCo in the background.
I did.
Do you read that magazine?
I do. I subscribe to it. Every month they feature a collection from somebody, and it caught my eye because there was a CoCo 3 there, and also some CoCo cartridges, but there was also a Vectrex. But what I didn't recognize was the name. Yeah,
so it turned out to be Blake Patterson, who is a member of our community. He also maintains his own internet presence at a site called byteseller.com, and he does quite a bit of blogging related to retro computing and gaming. Anyway, later I spotted that Blake had posted a blog entry titled "On Being Featured in Retro Gamers Collector's Corner," and I noticed that the picture in the blog was the same one that Neil had posted. So I've kind of put two and two together. So pretty exciting stuff. What do you think of Retro Gamer magazine? You like that?
I do. I've been enjoying it so far. I've been subscribed to it now for about 3 years.
And that's been around for several years, isn't it? About 10 or 11 years?
It has. Yeah, they've completely gone through the 80s now on the throwback 80s section. It's done.
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, I think you can get that in my local bookstore. Some reason I just never developed a taste for that magazine, but maybe I should go back and check it out again.
Yeah, it's not a bad magazine. Even if you're not really into video games, every month there's always a write-up on hardware, like old obscure computers, and it's kind of neat. So I read about some of the Japanese computers, even like the FM7 and systems like that.
Very cool. All right, so if you're looking for more reading material in your retro gaming hobby, you may want to check out Retro Gamer magazine. Okay, the next item is from Paul Thayer, who have seen Paul posting quite a bit on Facebook, where it was pretty obvious he was working on some sort of CoCo game, but I wasn't quite sure what it was or what it did. So I kind of goaded him into posting a video showing, or actually he posted 3 videos, I guess, showing some gameplay. Now I think I understand how his game works. Anyway, so he's posted some work in progress videos of his game, which seems to be called Blocked. And so this is it's kind of like a sliding puzzle game or something. Basically, he has a block on the screen. He identified as a red block, and then I guess there's an exit point around the edge of the screen, and then you have a number of other blocks that are kind of blocking the way, as blocks tend to do. And so then your job then is to move the blocks around and see if you can get the red block moved out of the exit. So it's kind of a puzzle game. And I understand it's written in the Super Extended Color Basic on the CoCo 3.
That's what amazed me. I can't believe how nice the graphics are on that. And that's written in BASIC?
That is my understanding.
Wow.
And so it's a cool project, really neat stuff. It's always good to see some more games. I tell you, I kind of like the puzzle games, kind of the slow-moving, more thinking games sometimes as good as anything. Farfall maybe is not exactly in that category, but when I sit down to play, sometimes I like to have, the more of the puzzle, push things around and solve the problem kind of games. It's a good job, Paul. Looks good. I can't wait to see more. We mentioned a little bit earlier that Neil and I had been on the planning call for the CoCo Fest in Glenside Color Computer Club. And so as part of that call, it came out that John Mark Mobley, who has been the editor for the Glenside newsletter that comes out quarterly, I think, that his personal commitments have changed and he may not really have the time he needs to devote to that endeavor of keeping up the newsletter. And so they are looking for someone else who would be interested in editing the newsletter. They put in a pretty good effort to recruit our own Neil to do that job, but I think Neil managed to get away.
I saw that.
So I just thought I'd put it in the announcements here, the news. Maybe it should have been an announcement. Anyway, one way or another, if you're interested in editing the Glenside newsletter, make yourself known, and I'm sure somebody will be happy to talk to you about it. All right, so our last 2 news items are maybe a little bit self-serving for me, but I am involved in, both of them, one more than the other. But I'm going to go ahead and mention them because I think they're big news items, no matter who's involved with them. We're going to go ahead and talk about it. So the first one is the Super Pack Cartridge-Case preview, which Boise posted some pictures of on the Facebook group. So basically, the past year or so, I developed a cartridge case for Farfall, and I made the cases myself using cast plastic resin, which was fun, kind of an artsy craftsy kind of thing to do. But it turns out it's not something that's suitable for high volume production. And so kind of mentioned this, and I think everybody was pretty impressed with the notion of having new cartridge cases, but I just was not up to producing a whole lot of them. And so Boise apparently had some contacts he was able to exploit and get the ball rolling on getting a set of cartridge cases produced using an injection molded process. And this is the process the big boys use. This is what all your household goods or whatever made out of ABS plastic, all that stuff. This is not 3D printing. This is not just sitting off in the corner and watching it spit out a little line of plastic and go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, building it up a layer at a time. This is actual professional quality injection molded plastic. Anyway, it took us a while to get all the details worked out. We've now got some samples back, and we're not yet fully in production, but we soon will be. These are, like I said, ABS plastic, injection molded, mirror finish, professional looking cartridges for ROM cartridges and whatever else that you can plug into that port and fit inside the case. These are going to make really nice Farfall cartridges. They might make some nice Follow CoCo or CoCo cartridges or whatever else I come up with in the future. I'm hoping maybe they'll make a nice cartridge for Load Runner or
Popstar Pilot.
Popstar Pilot. What was Mr. Strong's Minesweeper game?
Bomb Squad?
Bomb Squad, that'd be a good one. Anyway, I am really excited about this. I mean, this is really cool stuff. This is professional grade packaging right here. Let me tell you what. I don't really think I can overstate it. These are awesome little cartridge cases, and maybe you're satisfied with buying old copies of popcorn and ripping the labels off and putting a new cartridge board in there for whatever your projects are, and that's great if you want to do one or two boards. That's probably fine. The world won't miss that extra popcorn cartridge. But if you want real homebrew, nice quality, just like it was made back in the day sort of releases, we need a source for new cartridge cases, and that's what this is.
Now, I haven't seen them in real life, but from the pictures, they do look amazing. Like, they're just polished and clean. It's the real deal.
Yeah, I wish I could show you right now through the podcast. I've got it right in my hands. These are beautiful. They are tough. They're not brittle like so many of the original cartridge cases are. When you do start to take them apart, half the time the tabs break off, or sometimes even the body breaks on some of them. So this is good stuff, brand new. It is a somewhat different design than the Tandy cartridges. There's no sliding door. I don't miss it. I kind of like it so that the board kind of sticks its tongue out at you. If you do need to clean the contacts, it should be easier with this design. I don't know if it makes it any more or less likely that you'll have to clean the contacts, but they're out there if you do need them. I think it's an attractive case, an attractive design. I don't know. I'm just really excited about them. I think they're real exciting stuff.
And I'm excited about it because it's going to bring more, it's going to inspire more homebrew games and programs.
I sure hope so. That is definitely the point. And, not only bring out more games, but I think it's more exciting to buy a homebrew when you can get it to something tangible in your hand and you can see it and somebody's actually made it and packaged it and it just looks nice and feels nice. This sort of thing's been available on a number of other platforms for some time. You can go out and look at Atari Age and you see a bunch of homebrew games available, 30, 40, 50, sometimes more. I'm not exactly sure where we're settled. We might discuss that here in a few minutes. On price, it's probably going to depend on the game and the seller and whatever, and it may not even be a game. Sometimes there are certain kinds of cartridges that'll fit, certain kinds of boards that'll fit in these cartridges that might do some utility stuff, a flash card or something like that. We'll see what people show up with. Anyway, even if it's just ROMs, there's a lot of cool stuff that we can build. I'm very excited about it, and maybe even Paul's blocked game, whatever else. It should be some pretty cool stuff coming. I really hope this is going to be a big thing. We're going to sell a bunch of these. The color is red. Not sure exactly how to describe it. I'm sure somebody could come up with something fancy name, but I think it's a very attractive color. Very excited.
It's exciting. It's going to breathe new life into the CoCo world, I guess you can say.
I think so too, and it should breathe new life into my Farfall production line. So if you're looking for a Farfall cartridge, if you're on the waiting list, I think it's as long as you're happy with getting an injection molding cartridge instead of a resin cast cartridge, then I think you're going to be happy in the next few months.
Gotta fulfill that order, the backlog.
Yeah, pretty exciting stuff, huh? On to our final news item. Back around the USA Thanksgiving.
Gobble, gobble.
As opposed to the fake Thanksgiving that the Canadians practice.
I was waiting for that.
It occurred to me that it would be cool for the CoCo to have a Christmas-themed game. I've seen these on a few other platforms. I know the Intellivision has one called Christmas Carol that is apparently a pretty nice game. The Intellivision people are pretty excited about it. I'm not really aspiring to be as nice to be as cool and awesome a game as Christmas Carol, but I was just looking for something that would kind of have a Christmas game to be able to pop up your CoCo and sit back with some eggnog and play a Christmas game. So I started thinking about things to do, and so what I came up with is just the original idea was to have 3 or 4 just mini games, nothing too exciting, but you string 3 or 4 of them together and pass them some time. Unfortunately, I didn't get quite as much time to work on games as I was hoping for, so I really only got 1 mini game done so far. But it's far enough along, you're able to play it, and I actually think it's kind of fun. And so I decided, in the spirit of things, to kind of give it a name. It's called the game itself is the premise is that you enter the forest and you have to go and get the last evergreen tree and escape the evil snowmen that are chasing you through the forest and escape the forest with the tree. And so in the spirit of that, plus the fact that I didn't get quite as much time to work on it as I would like to get to the larger game, this little mini game, looking to release it under the name of Christmas Rush or Xmas Rush. Xmas because that implies that you're really you're rushing when you can't even write out Christmas, right?
And it's 8 characters. It fits in the RS-DOS prompt.
That's right. It's a perfect size for. So anyway, Neil has seen the game. He's been able to play an early version of it. Today I posted a video of myself playing it, made it available for some people. It seems like it's getting some positive feedback on social media. I'm hoping by Christmas Eve to be able to release a playable version as a RS-DOS binary. Like I said, it's pretty simple. It's just going to be, can you get the tree and escape the forest? I'm not even sure how to score it at this point. It may just keep track of how many tries and how many times you actually got the tree, and that's about it. So there's at least a down payment on a Christmas-themed game for the CoCo that may take me another year to actually fulfill, maybe more, depending on what happens in the next year. But there you go. Hopefully we're going to have a Christmas game available maybe by the time you hear this podcast. Anyway, that is the end of our news segment. Like I said, a little shorter than usual, but still plenty of news considering it's only been a couple of weeks since our last podcast. Please excuse this interruption. This is John Linville with an important breaking news item for the CoCo Crew. So we mentioned earlier in the show that we were recording a bit earlier in our cycle for this episode due to some travel commitments related to the end of the year holidays. And so it was probably all too predictable that someone would post a news item a little bit too late to make this show, but in this case we have one that seems important enough that we needed to go ahead and try to get it in because it looks like an exciting piece of software being announced. So we have someone with whom I am not familiar. His name is Jamie Cho. He is announcing on the Facebook group a new game called Splinter. And reading from the Splinter manual on the About page, well, maybe not the About page. Reading from the Splinter manual, it says Splinter is a CoCo 3 Break the Bricks video game. Splinter features colorful 320 by 192 graphics and smooth animation. There's a lot of cool pictures. There's a picture on Facebook. There are more pictures at the Splinter Manual, which is really a web page. We will include a link to that in the show notes. Jamie has done a great job, it appears, with making a visually attractive game. Again, it's essentially Breakout, so, it's a familiar game, but still fun nonetheless. And he's done a good job showing you some pictures, documenting how it works, and, all that kind of cool stuff. In fact, Jamie's gone a step beyond there, and he has posted a link to a GitHub page where he has the complete source code available not only for Splinter, but apparently for a few other projects he has, some of which have roots in the way past. I don't know Jamie, never met him. Just seeing his front page on the Facebook, he looks like a fairly young guy, so I'm not sure exactly what his story is. Jamie, I'd love to hear more from you. If you'd like to send us some feedback, let us know something about who you are, what you're doing. And, of course, I'd love to see you in April at CoCo Fest. Anyway, it's a nice little piece of news. Thank you for the contribution to the community. A cool new game. And, we are happy to include the news item here. Another quick news bump. If you are following Paul Thayer's Blocked game, he also announced recently on the Facebook page that he was completed with the basic version of the game, and that if you are interested, you can get that from him. So if that appeals to you, yes, here we go. Good news, the basic version of the game is now complete, requires 512K. Leave me a comment if you'd like to acquire one. Presumably he means the game and not the 512K. Yeah, he goes on to say, conversion to assembly has already begun, but it will be a while for the release. Please note, this plays decently on super overclocked VCC, but not sure on real hardware. So anyway, your mileage may vary on the performance, but also another cool piece of news that we're happy to get in there. So, with all that said, we now return you to your regularly scheduled CoCo Crew broadcast. All right, we have one more thing. Since this podcast is our year-end podcast, it means that it will come close to, obviously the beginning of the next year, which will bring with it a Retro Challenge competition. So, Retro Challenge 2016/01. Well, I'll just read part of the announcements. Retro Challenge 2016/01 competition will run from January 1st, hangover or not, to the end of the month. Blog entries should be complete by midnight on Sunday, 31st January, GMT. The guys that run Retro Challenge are in the UK, so they have a preference for that time. Anyway, it says please email Mark at wickensonline.co.uk with your name or handle, a brief synopsis of your project, and a URL for your blog. Also points out that Twitter's become the preferred communications media for updates. And if you make a post to your website, please tweet with the hashtag Retro Challenge. Anyway, if you're not familiar with Retro Challenge, Retro Challenge is a loosely disorganized gathering of retro computing enthusiasts who collectively do stuff with old computers for a month, and of course they do so twice a year. Continue on the website, the event is very much open to interpretation. Individuals set their own challenges, which can range from programming to multimedia work, hardware restoration to exploring legacy networking, or just plain messing around. Change the wording there a little bit from what the website says. It really doesn't matter what you do, just so long as you do it. While the Retro Challenge has its competitive side, it's not really a contest. It's more like global thermonuclear war. Everyone can play, but nobody really wins. Yeah, in all seriousness, Retro Challenge is a fun event. I've participated in it many times. Back in July of this year, 2015, kind of stumbled on mine and didn't have as much time because I attended Kansas Fest. And, anyway, it's all a bunch of excuses, really, but I didn't really get much of an entry for July. But previously, I've had a number of successful entries, including, of course, the initial writing of Farfall, which won the event back in January 2012, or one of the winners. Anyway, if you are looking for something to prod you along to do something cool with your retro computer, Retro Challenge is a great opportunity to do so. Looking at their current contestant lists, I do see one from, let's see, is this Adam Green? Yeah, Adam Green. He is going to design a cartridge for the color computer. I think he's talking about doing a PCB layout for the hardware side, and with a possible follow-on in the later events for the software to put on it. I don't see any other color computer entrants right now. I probably will have an entry, but I don't know right now what it will be. As it stands, I've still got a couple of weeks to think of something. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, if you're looking for a challenge, literally a challenge, to do something with your retro computing stuff, this is it. If you're just looking for some entertainment, look to see what some people do with their retro computing stuff. Quite often, there's a mix. Some people do very little. Some people do stuff that's not particularly interesting. Maybe clean up their room or something like that. But quite often, there's a few real gems where somebody does. Either writes a new piece of software or does something really crazy, putting a piece of old hardware into service that it was clearly never intended to do. Anyway, can't recommend it enough either as a participant or as a spectator. So check out retrochallenge.net and we will put a link in the show notes.
It's a Radio Shack Merry Christmas.
Oh, I remember that Christmas. Dad gave me my first shortwave radio from Radio Shack. What memories. This Christmas, we got our son's Color Computer 3 from Radio Shack. It hooks right up to our TV and was on sale for less than $130. The Color Computer 3 makes learning fun. Jimmy even lets me use it for word processing when he isn't playing computer games. Lucky I still got my shortwave.
Save $70 on the sale-priced Color Computer 3, only at Radio Shack.
All right, time for some feedback. We have a few feedback items this month, a couple of them related to the CoCo 3 Gimme Tech segment from episode 6, the first of which is from William Astle. He points out that when I mentioned the memory range and the FEXX memory range, FE00 to FEFF, I think I said, or at least made it sound like, that was an extension of the I/O area. In fact, that is mapped back into a specific section of RAM, and that is used for managing the interrupt vectors in the operating system like OS 9. Good point. Thanks for pointing that out, William. He also suggested that maybe there was some more details to the SCS enable disable. I'm not sure about that. I haven't been able to validate that on the CoCo 3, and I haven't found any source in any of my reference material. As far as I know, that still totally disables it or not. William thinks that maybe it disables the shadowing, but not the actual FF4 address. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. I don't know exactly what the details are there, but you may want to be aware if you're experimenting with disabling SCS on your CoCo 3. Another point in that discussion was one of the PIAs that would have been tied into the control lines for the VDG. Since the Gimme is in charge of the graphics now, it is actually handling those data access itself. The PIA lines are just sort of hanging off in space. And I suggested that maybe there's a way you could make use of those for some other purpose, but I wasn't really sure what. So John Strong writes in and says, you might be able to use the ghosted PIA lines as an input. So that's a good point. Maybe if you had some kind of digital signal that you just needed to read inputs from, maybe you could tie those to the now unused lines on that PIA and read back from them because, well, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if you can't actually read the values from the Gimme. Maybe it would come straight from the PIA. Or, I don't know, there might still be a conflict. But it's a good idea. It might be worth trying. So thank you, John. One other thing I mentioned in there, mentioned that we were talking about Farfall at one point, and I mentioned it, and we're talking about Jim Geary. And I mentioned that Jim had a game that called Farfall without the H, so Farfall, that I thought was inspired by my Farfall, Fahrfall. And so he writes in to say, yes, Farfall is definitely a text version tribute to John's Farfall. So there you go. Good to hear from you, Jim. Thanks for the feedback.
You know I'm going to have to try that game now.
You definitely should try it. It's I think it's semi-graphics, probably SG4, because I think it'll run on the MC10. But it's pretty cool to see that it's the same game concept in a different graphics environment, and probably a little reimagination in there too. Let every flower bloom, man. That sounds like a cool thing to me. Anyway, I think that's the end of our feedback section for this month.
Radio Shack understands that a computer purchase is a serious personal and business decision. But what's really important is the company behind the computer. At Radio Shack, when you buy a computer, you buy a company. A company committed to technology, service, and support. We'll be here when you need us. With a telephone hotline, training, education, and excellent service. Tandy Computers, in business, for business. Tandy, clearly superior.
Okay, so our host discussion topics seem to continue to be a popular thing. We are going to, this episode, we're going to have a roundtable discussion with a few guests on Christmas memories involving the CoCo, but we thought we'd still throw in a short host discussion just sort of to hold to our normal format. So today, for our host discussion topic, we are going to bat around the idea of the value proposition provided by homebrew software development, homebrew game development in particular, for the CoCo. Obviously, as somebody who's developed homebrew games for the CoCo, I probably could go on and on a bit about this. Obviously, I think they're a cool thing to do. And it's cool just from the developer side, but it's as somebody who might consume somebody else's games, I think it's really cool to have a community that's producing homebrew software. I think that's a pretty sign of a healthy community. I just think it's cool to buy something that's been produced today as a tribute to this machine that has been such an important part of my life. So with those seeds for the topic, I'm going to turn it over for a little bit to Neil and let him tell us what he thinks.
I think homebrew is excellent because somebody like myself who's not a programmer or a game developer, it's a good way to look forward to new software for a machine that's, obviously been discontinued 20, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it's really the only outlet to get new games and software.
And so why do you care? Just to lay it out there.
Well,
there are better, ostensibly there's better gaming platforms available these days.
It's true, but, with our love to the CoCo, obviously, for one thing, and you just get tied to hung up on a certain platform. Although there is lots of games for it, you're always looking forward to a new game.
Yeah, I always think it's cool to pick up a homebrew item for any platform that kind of dates back to that era. And I'll point it to my kids. Hey, look, some guy like me sitting in his home with his kids running around making a lot of noise in the background wrote this game. And so that's exciting to me. I think there's that other crazy person out there willing to do that.
It's so true, and it doesn't necessarily have to be taxing the machine either. Like even if it's a more simple game, just the fact that it's something new, it's exciting.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, there's a lot of homebrew games out there, particularly for like the Atari 2600, that do amazing things, that almost unfathomable technological tricks and feats they're performing to be able to pull off the displays that they're showing. And, the Star Castle for the Atari 2600 or a lot of these other homebrew games, they show up and they just do these amazing things that, the people who designed the hardware just would not have thought was even possible. But those aren't the only games that are cool. I mean, so Farfall was inspired by a game for the Atari Jaguar called Downfall. And Downfall is a cool game, but in terms of what the Atari Jaguar can do, Downfall doesn't even cause it to break a sweat. It could be mining for Bitcoins in the background and still play Downfall, but it's still a fun game, and it's cool, and you get the cool aesthetic from that era, and it's just fun. It's something to do. For whatever reason, we all have our own reasons for loving the old machines, particularly the CoCo in our case. It's cool to kind of call everyone around the fire, and I can say, see, this is what I can do, and this is what I think is fun, and what do you think? Do you like it? Is this, whatever? So that's cool and all, and I guess it comes to turn the discussion around back to what is the value. I mean, there's the sort of the moral value. It's something for me to do and show and my Rage Against the World or whatever, exercise my skill to produce something. That's only going to take you so far in some cases, and some people will take farther than others. I guess it comes back to how much are you willing to pay to see those things pop up and be produced. And so do you think there's a ceiling on that? And where is the ceiling for what people pay for homebrew games? And does it change if they're homebrew games as discs or disc images versus homebrew games as a cartridge?
I think cartridges would be worth a little more money, in my opinion, anyhow. But as for a ceiling on it, I mean, well, everything has a price limit, but they don't have to be super cheap. I actually think they should be worth more money than, say, a game that you can get off the shelves, because one person, usually one or two people, actually made that game, so they put a lot of work into that. And it's a lot of time and effort, especially when it's somebody's hobby. It's it's not a factory. I
mean, there definitely is a very I'm not sure what the term is, but you're getting a little piece of that person, whoever has produced that code or whatever.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
There's anyway, ultimately, to produce something tangible like a cartridge or whatever, there is going to be money required to produce it. Just period. There's cost of materials and cost of labor involved, especially if you have to source it from outside. And it's not always going to be cheap. And if you want to add in hot new features or whatever in the hardware, that's more hardware that has to go in. That's going to be harder to design, harder to assemble. So that definitely raises the price. And so, you're going to have higher prices. So on the one hand, well, it's just a stupid old game system. We shouldn't pay more than $10, $20, whatever the price is. And so, okay, maybe if you're just a normal person, shall we say, that maybe that's your price ceiling. But none of us are in the hobby because we're normal, right?
That's right. The fact that we're messing with these machines 30 years later, it's got to tell you something.
I think maybe you have to factor in some of your own entertainment facility there. How much does it cost to go to a concert? How much? Just because it's a game for a retro system, is it worth less than a game for your PS4? Because the PS4 games cost $40-$50. Maybe even more.
And the other factor is I like to support the homebrew artists as well. Encourage them, they did a lot of work on that project, and maybe encourage them to continue on with another one.
Yeah, you also have to figure anybody producing homebrew software probably has a full-time job doing something else. Maybe it's producing software, maybe it's something completely different, but
they're not making a living on the old system.
And so throwing them a couple extra bucks, if that makes a difference for somebody, I don't know. I mean, it's a little self-serving because I am one of these homebrew people, so I can say stuff just, whatever I say, you could always say, well, he's just trying to get more money, whatever. It's one thing. Well, number one, I'm not going to produce anything in general for less than what it takes to make it. Maybe in some cases, I'll have my own agenda wanting to get something in the market or whatever, but don't count on it. So, number one, you're going to have to cover the production costs. Number two, even if that's covered, I'm only going to have so much capacity for making things at cost. And I would think the distraction factor of anything else coming along while I'm trying to make things at cost is going to be a lot bigger than if I'm making something at $10 or $20 or whatever a pop. Well, anyway, so I guess the jury's still out on what the exact cost should be on homebrew games or whatever. I just hope people will keep an open mind and think about, the values that's going in there and the cost of getting somebody. I mean, if you're in the hobby and you want new stuff produced, well, it's got to be somebody in the hobby that's going to produce it. And if we were going to try to bring somebody from outside of the hobby, it would probably cost even more because they're only going to sell a few copies, even at a relatively high price per game, say $50 or more. It's still not that much money to the person involved. They're still giving up of themselves to get you your game. So you probably need to factor that in to how much you value what's being offered.
And also to the developers, the homebrew artists, don't devalue your project either. Like, don't, just assume you're only going to get $20 or $30 for it. You should sell it and be rewarded a little bit for all your time and effort into the game.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And, so what? Maybe you're only going to sell 20 copies, 30 copies, 50 copies. There's only so much money to be made there. That doesn't mean that you need to give up your time for free either.
I was going to say, and that's right. And even at $20 profit, I mean, you're definitely not going to get rich off that.
It would be great if people would selflessly just give and give and give for whatever, but realistically, we all have other things to do, and producing cartridges for other people that once they leave my house, I'll never see the cartridge again. And many of the people I'll only ever see at CoCo Fest, if then. I'm sorry, I'm human. I've only got so much capacity for that. and while I will make some, and I'll send them out. In some cases, I might even send stuff out at a loss to a few people. But if I'm selling them at a loss, I'm only going to make a few, right? And if I'm breaking even, I'll make a few more. Realistically, if I can turn around to my wise-ass friends who say I'm wasting my time with a CoCo and say, well, I can sell these and make $10 of profit each one, or $20 of profit each one, shut them up. That might inspire me to make a few more. Then maybe there'll be a few more things available to buy in the CoCo community, and I think that would be a good thing. And
I think that's key, is to keep the inspiration going, not only software, but with hardware projects as well.
But anyway, I'm sure there'll be people who don't agree. If you don't agree, I'd love to have your feedback. You can send us an email. You can record your feedback. Try to keep it clean, and maybe we'll put it on the air. And maybe you have a good argument. Maybe there's some point we're missing. Maybe the love of the game just should be enough for all of us, and we should just all do it totally as a charity to all the other CoCo users out there. If you believe that, I would love to hear your argument why. So anyway, I think that's probably going to end our host discussion for this time. So until next time.
I've got a hardware problem. Oh, really?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. So it turns out that we're not quite done with our series on the CoCo architecture. I inadvertently left out a couple of maybe less glamorous, certainly hardworking chips in the CoCo, or at least in the CoCo 2 and the CoCo 3, that deserve maybe a little note. And since we had room for a small tech segment in this episode, I'm going to try to provide it now. So we're going to talk about two chips, the DAC chip and the SALT chip. These were two chips that were originally introduced with the CoCo 2. The idea is to produce, they're basically custom, in this case linear integrated circuits. They implement part of the circuitry of the CoCo and do so in a single package with the idea of producing part count and simplifying construction, and of course reducing cost in the CoCo 2. So for a little bit of history, as far as I can tell, these chips were introduced for the CoCo 2 beginning in 1983. They were not part of the CoCo 1, which implemented these same functionalities with actual discrete components. The service manual for the original CoCo models is 263026 and 3027. Lists the two parts. One is a custom SALT with a part number 8050527, which then is the manufacturer's part number SISC 50527. Screened on the chip is the SC 77527. And then with a Radio Shack part number, you could order the MX6201, which seems a little out of the blue compared to the other part numbers, but whatever. And of course, then there's the custom DAC chip, part number 8050526, manufacturer part number SISC 50526, and then the silk screen on the chip SC 77526, and then the Radio Shack part number MX6202. These chips were used on the CoCo 2. I think all of the models of the CoCo 2 used the same chips, and then the chips were used as well on the CoCo 3. Yeah, so they were used on the CoCo 2 and the CoCo 3.
I've got a software question. Oh, really?
Moving on to the features, let's start with the DAC chip, which of course is the digital analog converter chip. The core of this chip is, of course, a 6-bit digital to analog converter. We've talked about how the CoCo has this 6-bit DAC, but this is the chip that actually implements it on the CoCo 2 and the CoCo 3. Also internal to the DAC chip is a sound multiplexer. This allows you to choose between, it's probably technically 4 different sources: the DAC itself for audio output, the cassette input for audio output, the audio pin on the cartridge port, and then The fourth selection is really just not connected, so it's a no sound output. Also in this chip is a comparator, which is basically just exactly that, a voltage comparator that compares between on the one side the output from the DAC and on the other side the input from a joystick. That is used for the successive approximation analog to digital conversion for reading the joystick. Also inputs to this chip include two select lines that are used to select between the outputs of the sound multiplexer and the inputs to the comparator. Those two lines select both of those in settings in parallel, which is a little unfortunate. So if you're trying to play audio, for example, and then you want to go and sample the joystick, you have to switch, depending on which joystick axis you're selecting, you have to switch off to the other sound sources as well. So that can create a little bit of noise when you're sampling joysticks during a game. There's an additional line that is the sound enable. It's coming from the PIA. So I guess effectively you could select the no sound source to disable sound, or you can still use the sound enable line to enable or disable sound. And then of course, if you remember, outside of this chip there is the 1-bit audio pin driven by one of the PIA lines, and that's not subject to this enable or disable. So it's a little bit weird, but anyway, internal to this chip, there's the sound enable line, which controls the sound output chosen from the sound multiplexer, which of course is either the output from the DAC, the cassette, or the cartridge, or nothing at all. A electrical engineering note: the DAC inside the DAC chip, the actual digital analog converter inside the chip, uses a 64 collector transistor for a current source. And so a transistor is normally a 3-terminal device with the emitter, base, and collector. And in this case, you've got a transistor that's set up with 64 different collectors that each are basically sourcing a different amount of current. And so this level of control is supposed to help with giving good linear response for your audio output. On the output side, the sound output from the DAC is attenuated to a 3.9 volt peak-to-peak signal, which is intended for the RF modulator. Sound outputs coming from the cassette or cartridge sources are not so treated, and so those sources would have to keep themselves within that 3.9 volt peak-to-peak range in order to avoid what's known as clipping. And clipping is when you get a distortion based on an inability for a circuit to reproduce the level that you're specifying. Well, that's probably good enough. Basically, the DAC output has some signal conditioning to prepare it for being sent to the RF modulator. The cassette and cartridge sources do not have that, so you either have to adjust the volume on the cassette, which we've all probably had to do, or if you had a cartridge providing audio, it needs to be so engineered as to maintain that 3.9 volt peak-to-peak signaling. Okay, on the output side, there's one more output, which is the cassette audio output. This is driven by the DAC, and then output to the cassette for recording. And that output is conditioned to provide a current that will result in a 1 volt peak-to-peak signal when it's driving a 2 kilo ohm load. So a little geeky on the EE side, but hopefully that's useful information. Anyway, not much more to say. Again, this chip basically just replaces a collection of existing analog circuits on the CoCo 1, replaces that on the CoCo 2 and the CoCo 3, and, well, that's what it does.
I've got a hardware problem. I've got a software question.
All right, and for the final bit of this tech segment, we are going to talk about the SALT chip. SALT stands for Supply and Level Translator chip. So the SALT chip has several jobs. One is power supply regulation. Another is Rs-232c level translation for signaling. It contains a zero crossing detector used for reading the cassette tapes, and it also will drive the cassette relay. So, going down that list, the chip provides a regulated 5 volts to the system. So it actually takes the voltage inputs coming off the transformer and regulates it out for a plus 5 volt output for most of the system. It also produces a minus 5 volt output, which is only used for Rs-232 signaling. Moving on to Rs-232, in case you're unaware, Rs-232 signaling is a little strange. It basically defines 2 signal types or symbols, a mark and a space. And generally, so I guess a marker corresponds to sort of a logic 1, and a space corresponds to a logic 0, and I think that's correct. Anyway, Rs-232c is a bit fast and loose with these. It's a little odd in that it uses a negative voltage for one side and a positive voltage for the other. So, and even stranger is the negative voltage is used to represent the mark. So it also is a little bit sloppy in that it has a wide range of voltages that can apply. So on an Rs-232 line, if you send between a negative 3 volts to negative 25 volts, that represents a mark, and if you send 3 volts to 25 volts positive, that represents a space. And so anything between 3 and negative 3 is undefined, so don't send that. Anyway, so that seems it's a little backwards, and anyway, the voltage levels, for one, it's not based on 0, it's based on the plus to minus range, and it's, the signals aren't nailed down. So anyway, on the input side, the salt chip, it expects to have some conditioning so that the negative voltage is, at least in the CoCo circuits that I've seen, and I think that's the way it's designed to work, is that the negative voltages are clamped using diodes or similar circuitry, so the negative voltages don't actually reach the salt chip. And so internal to the salt chip, you essentially have a 2 volt positive reference. And so then the circuitry basically looks and says if the incoming voltage is less than 2 volts, we're going to treat that as a mark. So it started out as negative 3 to negative 25 volts. Anything less than 0 gets clamped back to I guess 0. Comes in to the chip, and it says, well, if it's less than 2 volts, that's a mark. And if it was 3 volts to positive 25 volts in the first place, coming in, that gets then sent through this, is it greater than 2 volts comparison. And if it is, then it's a space. Again, if it's in between, God help you. So don't send anything in between the negative 3 and 3, or in this case, anything that's close to 2, I guess. Anyway, the output levels will then be sent to the PIA pins as in what are called TTL levels, which basically is a 0 to plus 5 that most of us are at least somewhat familiar with. That probably has, and so moving on to the output side, the Rs-232c outputs, obviously the signal comes at TTL levels from the PIA to the salt chip, and then it'll put an output, either a negative 5 volts representing a mark or 5 volts representing a space. So that 2 volt thing on the input, that suggests that maybe you could you could send in some odd signals from a non-Rs-232 source and be able to interpret them as ones or zeros if you know what you're doing, if you do it right. If you make sure, if you do experiment with that you do know what you're doing. I am not responsible for for any of that, but anyway, you can send in these signals, and those, it's not just the receive side of the Rs-232 signal. There's also that carrier detect line that can be operated in the same fashion. Also inside the salt chip is a circuit that is a zero crossing detector, and basically it literally is measuring the voltage and to see when the voltage swings across 0 volts, so from positive voltage to negative voltage. And it's my understanding that signal basically toggles like a clock as the voltage swings across zero. In the first one it'll go high, and then when it comes back across zero it'll go low, and just keep on going like that. And so by monitoring that at the proper rate, you can determine essentially the frequency of the incoming signal. Okay, so the final output of the salt chip is a current that drives the cassette relay. So this is the click that you hear. When you reset the chip, that's the relay clicking. When you reset the CoCo, that's the relay clicking. But when you start the cassette motor, you hear the click. That's a relay that is actually connecting two of the lines on the cassette interface together, and that's for the remote signal to turn the cassette motor on and off. Anyway, it takes a certain amount of current to drive that relay, and so the salt chip is responsible for providing that current. So essentially there's a TTL level input that then turns on a Darlington transistor inside the chip, which is a type of transistor configuration. It's really two transistors configured in such a way as it is able to sink a lot of current, and then that current going through the coils of the relay is what actually activates the relay switch. So that's a quick overview of the DAC chip and the salt chip, which were custom linear integrated circuits on the CoCo 2 and used through the CoCo 3 line as well. I hope you found that interesting. Nice little closing, hopefully 7th part of our CoCo architecture series. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Get ready, player 1. Get ready, player 2.
Welcome back to the Games Corner. For this edition, I've decided to pick a more wacky, not as common game to end the year off right. This game is called Marty's Nightmare.
Welcome to Marty's Nightmare.
It is programmed by the well-known video game CoCo coder, Steve Bjork. Steve's game portfolio is massive, with offerings such as Zaxxon, Rampage, Super Pitfall, Sands of Egypt, Mine Rescue, Z89, and more. But what makes this game unique in its own way is that it was produced exclusively for the 1990 Atlanta CoCo Fest. It was a souvenir game for that show. It's also unique because it's based on Marty Goodman. Anyone unfamiliar with Marty, he authored a column for the Rainbow magazine called CoCo Consultation. I really wish I could have met Marty. Well, who knows, maybe someday I will. If you are listening to this podcast, Marty, I'd like to see you show up at CoCo Fest this April. This game plays similar to Pac-Man, but with a different twist. Instead of me trying to explain it, I will read the quick write-up from the original game manual. Dr. Marty Goodman of CoCo Consultations walks into his hotel room to catch a good night's sleep. On his mind is the seminar that he will be giving the next day at the Atlanta CoCo Fest. Soon Marty falls into a deep sleep and starts dreaming about the fun he will have in Atlanta. Marty sees himself walking down the rows of booths and talking with CoCo users. Because of the unfamiliar surroundings of the hotel room, the dream quickly turns into Marty's Nightmare. The rows of booths turn into an engulfing maze with CoCo users transformed into a CoCo 3 keyboard or mouse. The users are now trying to hunt down Marty for answers to their never-ending questions. Your job is to help Marty see every booth in this nightmare before it is time for his seminar. There is probably some truth to this game. Although I never got to attend a CoCo Fest back in those years, when the CoCo was still current, I could just imagine how busy those fests must have been. It sounds chaotic and magical all at the same time. Well, I know this may sound crazy, but I have to admit this is my favorite game from SRB Software. Seriously, a game based on a CoCo Fest, Marty Goodman, and 7-Eleven coffee thrown in there. What's not to like? It also makes use of digitized speech, which you all know I'm a huge fan of. Here, have a listen to some of these cool samples for yourself.
Welcome to Marty's Nightmare. That's where he'll pick me up.
Hurry, your seminar's about to start.
I'll cover you, Marty.
I've got a software question.
Oh, really?
I've got a hardware problem.
Anyone wanting to give this game a whirl, it does require a Color Computer 3 with 512K RAM and joystick. Unfortunately, like many games of the time, the original disc is heavily copy protected. However, if you own a CoCo SDC, you are in luck. There's a working image of it on the CoCo Archive website for use with a CoCo SDC. I missed my chance to own an original complete copy of this game. A few years back, one copy actually showed up on eBay, and I forgot to bid. And the worst thing is, it didn't even sell for a high amount. So if anyone is listening to this podcast and has an original copy of this game and would like to perhaps sell it, please drop me a line. I'd be willing to pay a hefty price for it too. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Games Corner. If you're bored over the holiday season, you can always count on filling some time in with CoCo Gaming. Catch you all next year, and until then, game on.
Now, if there is any dedicated group of old computer users, it is certainly the people who still love their CoCo, the Tandy Color computer.
All right, welcome back. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction to the episode, we are going to do something a little new for the podcast. We're going to have some guests. And since it's the holiday season, we are going to have a roundtable discussion where we are going to discuss our fond Christmas memories and probably anything related to that, family memories or whatever else that comes along. But we're going to have a little discussion. So we've got some guests. And let me go through the roll call here. We've got the infamous Mr. Boise Pete.
Hello.
Hello, Boise. We have Michael Rowan.
Hello.
Mike is the musical genius behind our outro music, or at least part of the actual arrangement. He borrowed the tune from a arcade programming genius, my favorite programmer. And also joining us is Mr. Joe Grubbs.
Hi.
So we have a nice little crew. This is a group that if you enjoy listening to us, then you will be able to experience it live in person at CoCo Fest, where we will be happy to talk and talk. But anyway, gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And of course, Mr. Neil Blanchard is, of course, part of the group. Hi, Neil.
Hello, I am present here.
So
it feels strange, though. I'm sitting at a table that's not round, but this is a round table discussion.
Well, we can call it a square table discussion if you prefer, or hex table, whatever you've got. I don't know how they do it up there in Canada. But so anyway, I assume several of you guys are all. I guess we're all kind of in roughly the same age range, so the CoCo is a part of our childhood, and if you guys are like me, it was probably a significant part of our Christmas considerations, because Christmas is a great time to ask for things that you might not otherwise get just randomly during the year. Am I right, guys?
Yes.
So, has anyone got a specific Christmas memory they would like to share?
Well, I mean, I guess I can start. I've kind of told this story before, but I'll go in a little bit more detail. When I was a kid, my dad, and I guess through the late 70s and early 80s, he taught computer science at UNC Charlotte, and he had gotten into the new line of TRS-80 computers. And he started out with a Model 2, and then later on upgraded to a Model 16. And he brought that home, and I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I became like really enamored with it. I got really into it. And I was familiar with Radio Shack. I loved electronics and other nerdy things. And so I decided that I wanted a computer of my own. So Christmas of 1984, I remember. It seems like I really wanted a Tandy 1000 for some reason, and that was completely out of the question because of the price and because I was 8. So my dad suggested the color computer, and at first I remember actually like completely, turning my nose up at that idea. But then, the more I studied the catalog and saw them in the stores, at the mall, I kind of grew really fond of the color computer. So I remember asking Santa there at the mall for a color computer.
Oh, wow. And Santa said, what?
And, Santa was drunk and had no idea what I was talking about. So
of course it'll be a color.
So the Christmas morning, I remember going downstairs and Santa did not leave me a color computer. So I was kind of disappointed, but there were presents under the tree, and one of the presents was, in fact, my beloved color computer, too. It was a Korean model. It was, the 263136, 16K machine with extended BASIC, And I remember that morning we hooked it up to, here's a flash from the past, we hooked it up to the 19-inch Sony Trinitron television in our living room. And I plowed through like the first 3 chapters of the Getting Started with Color Basic book. Just got completely immersed in it. And that kind of started my whole love affair with the color computer, and actually is the reason why I'm in the career that I'm in today, developing software. So that's the abridged version of my color computer history as it relates to Christmas.
Very good. Yeah, I know. In my case or whatever, I didn't get my original CoCo as a Christmas gift, and in fact I'm not really sure if there was any particular event. I just remember, so my dad was in the Army and we actually didn't live that close to where he was stationed. It's sort of a long story, but so he'd come home on the weekends and such, and one weekend, one Friday he came home and I heard this strange noise kind of coming from my room, and wandered back there to investigate, and there was this gray, looked like an electric typewriter, hooked up to the TV, and is doing some kind of little demo. It was a type-in from the back of, Getting Along with Extended Color Basic or whatever. But so anyway, so that was cool that Dad had got me that, a gift for the day. I don't know if there's any particular occasion. Might have been for my birthday. I remember it being in the fall. My birthday's in the fall. Anyway, later on, though, I remember, like I said, you could ask for a little bit more interesting presents towards the end of the year, and the master of coming through on those was one of my grandparents. She had been she had her husband had a son who ran a Radio Shack, and so she had kind of an in on getting Radio Shack stuff. So, and I'm pretty sure she was the one who provided my disk drive. So when I moved away from tapes to diskettes, that was thanks to my grandmother, and I'm pretty sure that was a Christmas gift. And so I'm sure I got other gifts in subsequent years related to the CoCo. Although I know one year I specifically asked for the editor assembler package, but when Christmas came, I didn't get that. I got, I don't know, chess or something, and so. It turns out that she had gone to the local Radio Shack and said, I've got this grandson, he's, 9 or 10 or whatever, and but he wants this editor assembler package, and the person said, oh no, kids don't want that. Kids couldn't possibly do programming in an assembly language. Here, buy him a game instead. And so to whoever this helpful Radio Shack salesman was from the mid-'80s. Thanks a lot, dude. Back me up at least 5 years on learning any assembly language, and I think I would have had a lot of fun with it as a kid.
But at least it wasn't color script sit, right?
Exactly. That probably would have been worse. You're right. Spectaculator, that would be another good one.
Video text.
that at least might be fun. Handyman, that probably would have been terrible.
Yeah, Handyman or color file,
Color file. I could have recorded my VHS collection, or back then I actually had some vinyl. Maybe I could have recorded those. I don't have any of that these days. I know Joe does. Well, what about you, Mike? We haven't heard from you. How about some Christmas or family memories related to the CoCo?
Yeah, I think early on with the color computer, it kind of the things I did with it were around Christmas time. Well, I'm a little older, so when I first got my first color computer was a Color Computer 2. I had grown up with a TRS-80 Model 1 that my dad had purchased, and just lived on that thing. and it played with the color computers on and off. Let's see, that would have been about 1984. I would have been 20 back then. So
All right.
just was getting out of the house. I had an early start. I joined the Air Force at 17, so I'd been out and about a little bit. I got my first real job doing computer work in that same year. And I guess that would have been a year later, in '85. And that would have been right around Christmas time. My job was primary job was connecting up DECnet terminal servers and VT220s throughout large offices to a data center. And I actually had my CoCo 2 running, I think it was AutoTerm, and used that at my desk at work because we had a shortage of the 220s.
Wow.
And was able to do stuff on the VAXs and the Sun systems we had at the time. And let's see, I think it was the following year, right after, that would have been Christmas time, I was married. We were pretty broke and living in the Detroit area, which was a lot more expensive than where I had lived. You know, they had announced the Color Computer 3, of course, in the fall there of, or I guess it was the summer '86. But I remember going in the Radio Shack store and seeing the Spectral Associates demos on the CoCo 3. And Christmas time, of course, they had the Christmas demo with the Santa coming out to the Radio Shack counter. And that was also the year that my, well, now my ex-wife, but I'd been wanting a disk drive because I did everything on cassettes, but just couldn't justify the $299 price tag for Drive 0 with the controller. My wife surprised me in Christmas. She had put one on layaway at the local Radio Shack there in Michigan. So that was a good Christmas for me. I finally got a disk drive. I remember typing in there were a couple of Christmas demos in Rainbow that would just, play some Christmas carols and have some flashing lights or draw some pictures like the Christmas tree and the presents.
Well, that's cool stuff. You mentioned, we'll come back to that, maybe to Rainbow. Do you have any other memories you wanted to share? I was going to move it on to Boise here to see if he had anything.
That's probably my Christmas ones, yeah.
Okay. All right, Mr. Pete, what's up?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking here. The two Christmases that I remember getting stuff CoCo related were 1985 and 1986. In 1985, well, let me preface that by saying that my birthday's in November. For November of '85, I finally got my CoCo 2, 16K CoCo 2, out of the local Radio Shack store that I had put on layaway since the summer. And in order to store programs, I got a cassette recorder at the same time. So I lived with my dad, and I told my mom, who my mom and dad were divorced, that I wanted a disk drive for Christmas. So she went to the local Radio Shack store in Opelousas and bought me an FD500 disk drive. So I remember taking my CoCo 2 to her house for Christmas because I would spend Christmas with her, and setting up my CoCo 2 there with the television at the house, and then hooking up the FD500. And having been using a cassette drive for about a month at that point, I was just amazed how much faster my programs loaded and saved, obviously, with the disk drive. So that was cool. And then in 1986, if you recall, the CoCo 3 came out in the fall of '86. So for my birthday in '86 in November, Dad bought me.
Did you get your CoCo 3 yet?
I got my CoCo 3. Yes, I did. And so that was an exciting time. So up to that point, I had been using a 16K CoCo 2 for a whole year. So you can imagine.
That's quite an upgrade.
CoCo 3, wow. Yeah. And for Christmas of '86, my mom bought me a CM8 monitor to go with the 128 CoCo 3. So, yeah. So by December of '86, I was all set. And one more thing I want to add to the '86 experience was that I don't know if you guys bought a CoCo 3 when they first came out at that time, but when I got my CoCo 3, I think we bought it from Computer Plus, which was a company, I don't remember where they were out of, but they advertised in Rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
And when the CoCo 3 was shipped, inside of the box of the CoCo 3 was the copy of the December 1986 issue of the Rainbow, and that, of course, had some Christmas programs and so forth that I typed in. So it's kind of that issue stands out to me as being a very special issue for that reason.
Cool. Well, that's kind of a good segue. I was going to mention, and obviously the Rainbow was a hugely influential magazine for the color computer. As they say back in the day, some podcasts ban the phrase back in the. So sometimes you have to say back in the Ferg. Anyway, we'll say back in the day here. So back in the day, Rainbow was a hugely influential magazine in our community. I think no one can deny that. And of course, they had a habit of having a month-by-month theme, and it was typically the same theme for a given month each year. And I don't remember them all except for maybe the Christmas. The December issue would be Christmas themed. But I guess even that didn't have a different theme. It wasn't just Christmas. It'd be like graphics or something like that. Is that right?
I don't remember. I know November was the telecommunications theme, and there was a theme around the summertime. I don't remember what the December issue was. January was the education theme. Right.
So anyway, they did have these different themes, and so there was a certain amount of regularity to them, and no matter what the official theme was, there was always some Christmas stuff in the December issue for obvious reasons. So what do you guys remember about that? Typing in the programs that would show a Christmas tree or play Silent Night or something like that. Any of that stick out for you?
Well, I just go back to what I was saying, that the program in the 86 issue, December 86 issue, was a Christmas tree that it would draw, I think in P Mode 4 graphics. I think it was for the CoCo 2, and I think it said Merry Christmas and then Happy New Year. There was also, I think, a Hanukkah theme program in that issue.
No, that's cool.
I think, if I recall correctly. So
we're multicultural.
Yeah, even back then. Can you believe it?
One of my biggest memories with the CoCo for Christmas, I'm a little later than you guys. I got my CoCo. Actually, I got a CoCo 3 in '88. Didn't get it for Christmas, but what I used to use it for was playing Christmas songs through the Orchestra 90 music card.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
Don't know if I drove my parents crazy with that or if they liked it, but that was the theme for pretty much every Christmas for at least the 3 years after.
Oh hell! Here comes Neil with his CoCo again. Put on your earphones. Oh me. Well, that's pretty funny. At least the Orchestra 90 music is not too damaging to the ears, depending on what you're making it play. The CoCo's default 6-bit DAC can be a little rough on the ears after a while.
I used to pipe it through a nice stereo system, so it sounded pretty good.
Those extra 2 bits make a big difference.
It's a surprising amount of difference. Mike, you're a musician. Do you do any musical stuff on the CoCo? Do you have anything to add on the CoCo's musical capabilities?
Once upon a time, I had the Orchestra 12, which was the keyboard that you got the full keyboard that plugged into the 12-voice polyphonic synthesizer card.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't have there was Lyra software. I never was able to scratch up the bucks for that. It was all I could do back then to afford that. But it was kind of neat because you got this big keyboard that was to lower the prices, didn't have a case, so it was like a bare keyboard with a ribbon cable coming out of it. And so yeah, I played with that as you said back in the day, and I tinkered quite a bit with bells and whistles. I don't know if you played with that. There probably is quite a bit of Christmas music out there on bells and whistles. That was an old program that would, I think that actually originated in Rainbow. But it would do, play what, three tones simultaneously? So it was kind of a step up from just using the sound command.
I'm just picturing that keyboard that you're describing with the ribbon cable just hanging off of it. Doesn't that sound like just the perfect peripheral for a CoCo? I mean, it seems like it's just not a CoCo when you get one if it doesn't have a hole drilled in the side or a wire hanging off of it. Sometimes crazy stuff. I bought a CoCo 1 through Glenn Vandevigler's site earlier this year, and that one had it had all kinds of mods. It had a decorative, I guess a fan grill is what it was, drilled into the top, so you could mount a fan internally. But the drill, it wasn't just random drill holes. It was nicely decorative, different size holes and everything. And it even had an extra button added to the chiclet keyboard. Now, how in the world do you add a button to the chiclet keyboard? I mean, it was really a little square plastic button. Not just like a random, not like you buy something at a Radio Shack and drill a hole and screw it on or something. I mean, this was a little square plastic button, just like all the other buttons. I'd like to know who did that. I still haven't figured out what it does, although I think it's like almost like a run-stop kind of thing for debugging code. But anyway, I mean, I love the ones we get at CoCo Fest. You hold them up and Tony has to describe to you, oh, well, this CoCo 2, it looks like it's got this mod and this upgrade, and it looks like it's missing this, but it's got this added, and everybody has to kind of appraise that before we can bid on it.
I got a parts machine off of eBay, a Color Computer 2, just a basic 16K machine with Color Basic. And it had 2 toggle switches mounted at the top. One was connected in parallel to the power switch on the back, and the other was connected in parallel to the reset switch. But it's just kind of weird that they would use an on-off for the so basically, it didn't make any sense. And here's the kicker: it also had a power indicator, but instead of using an LED like a sane person would, it actually had an incandescent bulb. Wow.
That's funny.
So I just remembered another Christmas CoCo memory. For '85, a lady in our church bought me went to Radio Shack and bought a game for me, and I can't remember. It was a game pack. I think it was made by SRB Software. Is it Star Blaze or Star Blast? Does that sound familiar? Star Blaze.
Star Blaze.
Star Blaze. That must be it. Yeah, and that was my first exposure to software by Steve Bjork.
And how much richer has your life been since?
It was just an amazing moment in my life. I'll never forget. And then I got to meet him later on. It was even more meaningful.
Well, that's cool. Let's see. We asked earlier on the Facebook group, asked for the people there to share some memories with us. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read a few of those. And if you feel like reacting or adding to it, please go ahead and do so. So I pose a question. Is anyone up for sharing some CoCo memories for episode 7? Got a response from Vincent Tran. Says, even though I had a CoCo when I was a kid, I don't remember ever getting any games for it at Christmas. The only time I received anything CoCo related was from a few years ago. My younger sister and I were reminiscing about how I used to play games on the CoCo while she watched, and how I would never let her play. Probably a common story, right? Anyway, he continues, anyhow, that year she gave me a CoCo 1 for Christmas. That was what got me back into using / collecting CoCo stuff. It's become an obsession. So that's cool. We've got a modern Christmas connection for the CoCo there. Vincent's sister buying him CoCo stuff. Vincent, that man knows how to find CoCo cartridges. Let me tell you what. If there's a CoCo cartridge for sale on eBay, there's a pretty good chance that it's Mr. Tran. And it seems like everyone that I've bought in the past year, but probably 2/3 of them have come from Vincent.
He has an amazing collection of cartridges. I can't believe anytime he posts a picture, I'm in awe.
He and I have a little bit of an ongoing joke. He's not only is he good at finding cartridges, he seems to be really good at finding those cartridge cases, the storage cases, the ones that kind of look like what you'd used to put your floppy disks in, with the big swinging overhead door or whatever. So Radio Shack had those for the CoCo cartridges, and I've got 3 or 4 of them. I could probably use 2 or 3 more. But Vincent seems to have cornered the market on them. So if anyone's listening and they have one for sale, please contact me before you contact Vincent.
I was just going to say, John, you're looking for those cases, and I'm looking for the rainbow cases.
Oh, yeah, the rainbow, the red binders. Is that what you're talking about? Those are pretty cool. I actually stumbled across a collection of those rainbow stuffed with rainbows from somebody who lived not too far from here earlier this summer. It's pretty nice. It's not quite a complete set. I have a few extra. I probably can make a complete set now, just to make you jealous. But how about any other guys have those binders? You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen them, but I don't have any.
Yeah, they're pretty nice. I guess they used to be for sale in the rainbow, and I don't know, it's kind of neat. What they're like. I know it used to in libraries they used to would bind up like National Geographic or other kind of magazines, periodicals. They're binders that are like that, and it's but they're also emblazoned or engraved with the rainbow name. It's pretty neat stuff, and they're red, so they would make a very attractive Christmas display if you need to add some red to your decor. All right. Anyway, so now we know what to get Neil for Christmas. Moving on, I have one here from Hugo. How do you pronounce that? Dufort? Is that? I think he's
Dufour.
Because he's a Quebecois, if I'm not mistaken, so it's probably got a little Frenchness in the pronunciation. So Hugo says, I once programmed a countdown timer on my CoCo 2 during a family party at Christmas because we wanted to play a board game and the game's timer was broken. It took me 15 minutes to program the timer in BASIC. It displayed giant numbers in vibrant colors, and it even made beeping sounds each second. When I was older, I would program my own word processor on my CoCo 3 and have it print my homework, but that's another story. So Hugo definitely knows how to have fun at the family Christmas party, because that must have been very entertaining watching him program. Anyone else do any live programming at family events for Christmas or other gatherings?
The only programming I've done was entering in listings from the Rainbow Mag.
Yeah.
It's funny we kind of zeroed in on the same issue because I remember, I don't remember what year it was, but one year I did put my my Magnavox Pro 80 monitor under the Christmas tree and kind of had the cable snaked back to the CoCo and was playing the, I don't know if it was the Rudolph program or the same one we're talking about where it draws the different pictures and plays the different music. So.
Were you happen to be laying on your stomach with your legs up in the air?
Be careful! Don't let Glenn get any of those pictures. They might end up on the internet.
Blackmail photos. Yeah.
Oh man. Moving on, we have something from Mr. L. Curtis Boyle. Those of you not familiar, Mr. Boyle, of course, maintains an excellent game review site covering CoCo games. That is an excellent resource for people looking for information about CoCo games, and in many cases looking for binaries for certain CoCo games. It's a great site. We've talked about it on the show before. Anyway, Curtis says, if I can think of something Christmas specific, I could, or I think it means I would. The only thing off the top of my head is I made an animated tree/fireplace program in December 1982 that we ran in the background on our big old TV during Christmas that year. And of course he said, but that would be a pretty small soundbite. Well, no soundbite is too small, obviously, for this show. So anyway, that sounds kind of like what Mike was just saying. Turn the CoCo into an enhancement to your Christmas display. Anyone else do any Christmas decorating using their CoCo? No? Anyone? Bueller? Okay, well, we'll move on. I think the final one we'll mention here is it's a sort of a somber one from Mr. John Strong. Mr. John Strong's the author of Soviet Block. I'm not really familiar with that game. Anyone play Soviet Block?
I have. It's a Tetris clone.
Okay, so it's a Tetris-like game, or Tetris clone. Anyway, it says Soviet Block was written as a Christmas gift for my big brother Charlie, and I know Charlie was John's brother, and they were apparently pretty close. If you ever meet him in person, you get a chance to talk to him, and the subject of Charlie comes up. You can sort of see the sadness in his eyes. I know John misses his brother quite a bit. So, anyway, thank you, John, for sharing that with us. I know we all have loved ones that we think about during the holidays, and those memories can be, well, sometimes sad, but sometimes very sweet.
Yes, I remember Charlie from CoCo Fest back in the 90s.
How about anybody with memories of Radio Shack stores during Christmas time? Anybody frequent them during the holiday season?
Well, Radio Shack, of course, is an iconic Christmas display for. They always had all those, well, sometimes crappy, but sometimes pretty good remote control toys.
Yeah, I remember that.
If you have a Radio Shack near you, which I actually do still have one, I think they still have them. Of course, you have to step over the Sprint displays to see the toys.
Hey, at least you guys still have Radio Shack. We don't have that in Canada anymore.
Yeah. What about the Source? Do you still have that?
Yeah, we do. It's not the same, though.
But yeah, Radio Shack. Well, they used to always have back in the 80s. They'd have commercials and Christmas time, and of course they'd have the CoCo and later the Tandy 1000s and that sort of stuff. Definitely a part of Christmas and a part of Christmas memories from my childhood.
I certainly remember going into Radio Shack stores at Christmas time, and of course there were always sales around that time, and especially toward 88, 89 when the CoCo 3 was at the end. You could get, I remember seeing a CoCo 3, I think it was like $99. I think it might be in 1990 for Christmas. It was toward the very, very end of its life there, and it was there was a stack of them, and it was around Christmas time.
Yeah, well, come to mention that, I actually was working at Radio Shack full time. Long story, but I was working full time at Radio Shack in the fall and into Christmas and the winter of 90 and then on part of 91. Anyway, so working retail at Christmas time, well, that has a number of stories you could tell there. But yeah, I remember I was not really a CoCo person at that time. I'd kind of gotten past, actually had mostly given up computers a few years before in high school after I discovered girls. But at that point, I was back into computers somewhat, although more focused on DOS. But the CoCo was at the end of its life, and they were putting stuff on sale, and we had a CoCo 3 and a CM8. I think it was the last bit of CoCo stuff we had, and the manager was cutting the price as much as he could. I think it was actually a display unit, so it was even below the normal, whatever the list price was at that time. And I was just about convinced myself to buy it, just out of nostalgia or whatever. It's one of those, you sure you're going to buy it? You walk in that day and it's gone. Somebody had come in and bought it as I was making up my mind, I guess. So that delayed my re-entry to the CoCo world by a couple of years. But yeah, that was an interesting time. You still had some CoCo stuff in the stores. Back then, you could still order CoCo cartridges and such through the catalog.
I remember seeing a deal near the end of the CoCo lifespan here in Canada, where they had them for $99 if you bought an FD502 at regular price.
Huh.
Not a bad deal, I guess, if you were going to get a disk drive set up right away.
Yeah. So what was regular price on the FD502 then? Still $300 or $400?
I believe it was $299.
So yeah, about $300. Yeah, there was a discussion on the Facebook group sometime a few months back about was that actually a good deal if you had to buy the disk drive and the monitor. Sounds $100 for a CoCo 3 sounds like a pretty decent deal even in 90, 91. You add in the $300 for the floppy drive and the $250 or $300 for the CM8. Pretty soon you're above the price of an Amiga 500. So it kind of called in the question of was the CoCo 3 a good value for anybody who was not already a CoCo or CoCo 2 user? So you'd already have the floppy drive. I don't know. You guys got any thoughts on that?
I think it was a good value. Well, it was a good setup if you wanted to go, piece by piece, like instead of spending everything all at once.
Yeah, I agree with Leo. I think that Radio Shack probably expected people to get into the color computer through the computer itself, and then a year later, whatever. That's how I did. I built my system piecemeal. Not all of it. It wouldn't have been practical or economically feasible for me to do that as a kid.
Yeah, so I think it covered a pretty good range. I mean, even talking here, we discussed how we'd get games and stuff, and so if you did buy one at $100 and you had a game cartridge or two, you kind of treating it like a game system for a while, with maybe you dabble in programming for a while, save stuff to cassette, and build from there. So maybe it was a good way to build out. It's certainly what I did. It sounds like that's what Boise did, and probably what sound like all of you have talked about. Starting with kind of a lowly system and building up capabilities over time, and build skills that I think all of us have computer-oriented careers one way or another. Certainly helped to give us a real good start in life and a real good start on a career. I know in a very real sense that CoCo changed my life. So I think probably several of you would say something similar.
Yeah, I mean, as sentimental as it sounds, it really has. I mean, that little computer is. I mean, I blame it for where I am today.
Yeah. So anyone else want to add anything?
I think it's amazing that 30 years after, we're here right now discussing this. That's kind of cool.
Well, I wonder, is that a combination? Is that is it the technology itself that, or the nostalgia and the influence it had on us? Is it the technology that we developed that gives us the internet and the ability to talk to each other and find out obscure information and largely support ourselves on an ancient computing platform? Is it just a combination of all that as some unique secret sauce? Obviously, it's not unique to the CoCo because the Atari guys and the Apple guys and the Commodore guys and every other obscure platform, the platforms that make the CoCo look ubiquitous are out there doing the same thing now. So
I think a big part of the draw is the fact that the color computer, to coin a phrase, is it was the underdog. I mean, everybody had a Commodore 64 or an Apple, but it seems like at least growing up, I was the only one I knew that had a color computer, and I think that we seek out people that are like us, and even now 30 years later, we're all full-grown adults, but we're still drawn towards, or because of this this common, very unique niche interest.
Cool. I agree.
CoCo was kind of built our systems over time. We had a lot of options because things weren't built into it, and when we had Rainbow Magazine with every kind of add-on you could imagine. I know my first multi-pack was a slot pack from Howard Medical Systems. I had the Chris Burke CoCo XT hard drive and all that stuff later on my CoCo 3, so it definitely gave you something to do, tinkering things and getting them to work, which was a lot of fun.
Cool.
And like what Joe was saying, the CoCo being the underdog, I had to do the same thing. I mean, all my friends had PCs or Commodore 64s, but I seeked out user groups, and I was lucky where I lived. I had access to not just one user group, but two of them. So we'd meet monthly and share hardware, software, and just, we'd all help each other out.
Cool. Okay, I sent you guys, I guess I sent a video yesterday too, but I made available to all of you guys code for my little mini game. I'm calling it Xmas Rush or Christmas Rush. I know a couple of you had a chance to play it. Joe, did you get a chance to play?
Not yet, but it's,
no?
I'm going to do it tomorrow.
Cool. How about you boys? Did you get a chance?
I didn't, John, but I did watch the video to kind of get an idea. I think it's a really cool little concept game.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I mean, it's just a little mini game. I I know Neil's played some. I know Mike said he's played some. I wanted it to be, and may eventually, maybe by next year, I'll be able to add on a couple more mini games and make it into something a little bigger. But I was kind of surprised myself that it actually is kind of fun to run away from the snowman.
I think we could put in some reindeer somehow into the game.
You think so? Well, it's a little hard to draw in much detail, especially anything that's not orange or or blue or whatever.
Something that isn't NTSC compatible.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's been fun. I'm hoping to get that into a state that's a little more solid, at least, and maybe release something this week for people to play, and then maybe that leads to a larger CoCo-themed package of stuff for next year. So yeah, I just wanted to have a little Christmas present for the community. Speaking of presents for the community, I think maybe Boise has some new stuff he's uncovered as part of his role as CoCo historian. Boise, would you like to tell us about that?
Sure. As part of writing the book, I've been in touch with a lot of different people. And one of those people is Greg Zumwalt, who was a prolific game author back in the day for the CoCo. Greg and I have been in touch over the past few years, and he sent me a message about a couple of months ago. He was moving and he found some stuff, and he sent me a picture of a printout, a listing, and the title of it was the CoCo 4 ROM source code.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I was very surprised to see that, because if you may have read the book, I'm sure all of you have, and people listening to the podcast probably have. It's not a secret that the CoCo 4 supposedly never made it out of a concept stage, confirmed by, the prototype, or the mock-up, rather, that John Prickett had. So I asked Greg if he could send that code to me, which he did. I didn't have time to scan it in, so I sent it to Tim Lindner, who has a real nice setup for scanning multiple pages real fast. He did that. He sent me the TIFF files, and I have those, and I need to figure out where to drop them off. But I haven't even had a lot of time to examine the source code. It's all basically assembler listings. So with this source code available in printed form, there might be some clues that we can determine about the CoCo 4, what the CoCo 4 might have been. Greg didn't remember a lot. He just told me that he remembered being commissioned to work on the ROM for it. So as part of a Christmas present for the CoCo community, I'll be releasing that as soon as I can find a place to host those files.
I'm sure we can find that, find a place somewhere, and if you need any assistance, let us know. And if nothing else, we could probably put them out on archive.org. I'm pretty sure Jason Scott is pretty open on accepting that sort of thing. So
I have the files, and like I said, I'll next week or so is my intent is to get to that. I just hope that it doesn't open up any CoCo 4 discussions on the CoCo list.
Well, at least it'd be about something that actually may have almost existed.
What I've learned at this point is that anything will open a discussion about the CoCo 4 on the list.
Just about. Oh, I'm pretty sure that our current discussions about CoCo cartridges and cartridge cases, the cartridge case led to the discussion of cartridge expansions, and I'm pretty sure if we let that go long enough, we're going to have a CoCo 4 on a cartridge.
All roads lead to CoCo 4.
I think that's pretty much true.
I don't know. I think I would take that over with a Windows 10 talk.
That is true. The community's a little bad about repeating the same discussions over and over again, but hopefully we never repeat the Windows 10 discussion. Well, gentlemen, I think maybe that is winding us down a little bit. I think it's been a good discussion. I certainly would thank each of you for joining us, Mr. Boise Pete, Joe Grubbs, Mike Rowan, and, of course, Neil Blanchard. And this is John Linville. And I think we are all wishing you a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus, whatever, happy time off from your job, whatever you have to celebrate at the end of the year. We want you to have a happy one. And I think the rest of us will join me in wishing you a CoCo forever. So, all right, thanks.
After these messages,
we'll be right back.
Well, we have reached the end of the show. Feel free to set your tape to rewind and listen to it again. Hope you all enjoyed this episode and the extra holiday roundtable chat. I would like to thank my host John Linville for providing another excellent tech segment on the DAC and SALT chips. I have found this segment extra interesting because a side hobby of mine is stereo amplifiers. We also would like to thank all of you who listen to our show and send us feedback. We always like to hear from you. Wishing all of you a happy holiday and all the best to a new year. And yes, you better believe it, the CoCo will be strong in 2016. CoCo forever.